Marriage is supposed to be a shared journey, shared dreams, shared sacrifices, shared responsibility. But nobody tells you what it feels like when you discover that the person you trusted most quietly turned your entire life into a financial mystery novel. This is the story of how I emptied my savings to rescue my husband from secret debt, and how that single decision unraveled the truth about our marriage, our communication, and what loyalty really means. When I married Daniel, I believed we were honest with each other. We weren't flashy people. We lived in a modest 2-bedroom townhouse in Ohio, both working steady jobs, planning for kids someday. One night he came home pale, holding a stack of envelopes, collection notices. He owed over $42,000 in debt I had never heard about. He said it was from old mistakes before we met, bad investments, helping a friend, some credit cards. He was ashamed. I saw panic in his eyes, the kind that makes you believe anything. I transferred nearly all of my inheritance money from my late grandmother's estate. It wiped my savings clean, but I told myself that's what marriage means, stepping in when your partner stumbles. I slept that night thinking I had just saved our future. I had no idea I had only paid the entrance fee to a much larger betrayal. At first everything seemed calmer, the calls stopped. The mail went back to normal. Daniel smiled more, he hugged me longer. But something else changed. He became protective of his phone, always flipping it face down, always stepping outside to answer messages. I told myself not to become paranoid. I'd already sacrificed so much doubt felt disloyal. Then the spending began. New sneakers arrived. A smartwatch appeared. He brushed it off as gifts from work. That explanation should have stopped me cold, but love makes you accept stories you reject from strangers. I started tracking our joint account out of quiet fear. Nothing alarming until I noticed regular small withdrawals to unfamiliar services. They weren't bills. They weren't groceries. They were digital payments, dozens of them. When I asked him about one, his answer was instant. Oh, that's probably a system error. A system error that happened every week. I didn't want to become the kind of person who spies on their spouse. But one night he fell asleep with his phone unlocked beside him, glowing softly on the nightstand like an open door. What I found wasn't scandalous in the dramatic sense. No secret romance, no hidden second family. It was worse in its own quiet way. Private online memberships, coaching programs, exclusive groups promising fast success, motivational gurus selling elite access. Thousands of dollars, my grandmother's money, poured into digital rooms filled with strangers promising shortcuts to wealth. One program alone cost nearly $9,000. He hadn't buried himself in debt helping others. He hadn't made one mistake. He had been chasing fantasy after fantasy, convinced each new purchase was the one that would finally change our lives. I stared at the screen while he slept peacefully beside me. That was the moment my marriage split into a before and after. The next morning, I made coffee like nothing was wrong. My hands were steady even though my thoughts weren't. He kissed my forehead before work. I almost laughed at the irony. The man who could barely look me in the eye months ago was now casually affectionate. That night, I confronted him. He didn't deny anything. He didn't apologize right away either. Instead, he launched into a passionate explanation about investing in himself, about how these communities understood him, how he felt invisible in his real life. Invisible. The word landed like a quiet explosion in my chest. I reminded him I had drained my entire safety net for him, that the money was extra. It was my grandmother's legacy. He cried then, not loudly, but defensively, as though I had misunderstood his noble intentions. That was the first time I wondered whether love can survive two people telling entirely different versions of the same story. For weeks we lived like roommates performing politeness. I started sleeping lightly, waking whenever he shifted. He attended virtual meetings with headphones on, whispering like someone hiding a habit they refused to name. I reached out to a friend from work, Melissa, who had divorced a financially irresponsible spouse. She didn't sugarcoat anything. Debt isn't the problem, she said. It's secrecy. You didn't lose money. You lost informed consent. Those words followed me everywhere. Daniel began promising he'd stop, then promised he'd slow down, then promised he was almost done. The line kept moving. I found a hidden email folder. He joined another program while promising to quit the others. That night I packed a small bag, not to leave, but to prove to myself I still could. I slept on my sister's couch, staring at the ceiling, realizing I didn't feel abandoned. I felt relieved. When I came home 2 days later, the house felt unfamiliar. Daniel had cleaned obsessively, as if tidiness could erase damage. He wanted counseling. I wanted transparency. He wanted reassurance. I wanted accountability. The therapist asked us to list what trust meant to each of us. Daniel wrote support. I wrote truth. The difference wasn't subtle. We worked through months of sessions. Some days were hopeful. Some days felt like standing in a room where the floor keeps shifting. He showed me spreadsheets of canceled subscriptions. I showed him my depleted savings account. We hugged more carefully now, as though closeness required negotiation. I wasn't angry all the time. I was tired. Tired of watching someone I loved confuse belief with responsibility. Tired of realizing that you can rescue someone from drowning, only to discover they were swimming toward something you can't see. One evening, I asked him a question I'd avoided for months. Why didn't you just tell me the truth in the beginning? He stared at the wall. Because I thought you'd leave. It was meant as a confession. It landed as a sentence. He hadn't hidden the debt because of shame alone. He hid it because he feared consequence. And once I removed the immediate danger, he returned to the same pattern that created it. I realized something terrifying. My sacrifice hadn't saved him. It had protected him from learning. I wasn't married to a villain. I was married to a man who wanted escape more than effort. That realization didn't make me hate him. It made me question everything I'd been calling love. We separated 6 months later, not dramatically, not angrily, but slowly, like fog lifting. The divorce paperwork was clinical. The emotional fallout was not. Friends asked whose side they should take. I told them there were no sides, only consequences. He moved into a studio apartment. I moved into a 1-bedroom closer to work. I started rebuilding financially, emotionally, personally. I set up my first emergency fund. I tracked every dollar. I slept through the night again. Occasionally, he would message me articles about discipline, growth, renewal. I stopped opening them. You don't need motivation from someone who turned your stability into a learning experience. A year later, I saw him at the grocery store. He looked healthier, thinner, calmer. We spoke politely. He told me he was finally out of debt. I congratulated him honestly, not because I wanted reconciliation, but because growth deserves recognition, even when it comes late. Driving home, I realized I no longer felt bitterness. I felt clarity. Loving someone doesn't mean protecting them from reality. It means standing beside them while they face it. I had mistaken sacrifice for partnership. Now I knew the difference. Morality of the story. This story isn't about money. It's about truth, consent, and responsibility. When we hide choices from the people who share our lives, we don't just withhold information, we steal their right to decide. I paid off my husband's debt because I believed in marriage. I left because I finally believed in myself. And if you're reading this while carrying someone else's secrets on your shoulders, remember, love isn't proven by how much you sacrifice. It's proven by how honestly you're allowed to live.